The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or your video service provider.
Oshkosh. I'm your host, Cheryl Hentz. Very happy to have you with us tonight. I am happy to welcome back to the show someone who has been on this program a number of times over the years, and but never as an incumbent candidate, and that is why he is here tonight. I'd like to welcome Judge Scott Woldt to the show. He is the incumbent candidate seeking re-election to Winnebago County Circuit Court Branch 2 here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which is the county seat for Winnebago County. And our general election for folks here in Wisconsin is Tuesday, April 4th. And we'll talk more about how to get registered to vote and so forth at the end of the show. But welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I was going to say
much.
It's an honor to have you here, Your Honor, but that's a little too much honor in one sentence.
19 years ago when I became a judge, I was a big golfer. And I would say to all my friends, now they're going to be using the Your Honor on the golf course.
Yeah.
And they say, the way you golf, no, we won't.
Yeah. and they actually said that line in Caddyshack, the original Caddyshack. Yeah. Your Honor, and then he kind of snickered.
And actually, I was here as an incumbent candidate 18 years ago. I had an opponent 18 years ago. And
really? Wow, your memory is better than mine. I don't remember that. Well, I'm happy to have you back. So
I remember when Melanie was here. I think the first time I was here was with you and Melanie.
Yes, those were the early shows for sure. So you've been on the show a number of times, usually talking about programs that you've started or things like that. So I will just tell folks that you were appointed in 2004. And then you were elected for a full term in 2005. How long is a term?
6 years.
6 years for circuit court judges.
Correct.
Okay. All right, excellent.
This will be my 6th and final term.
I know when we talked on the phone, you said you're not running again. So, well, why don't you tell folks who maybe don't know anything about you, talk about who you are, where you come from, that kind of thing, why you got on the bench to begin with, and then why you're seeking re-election, and then we'll fill in the blanks as we go.
All right. Born and raised in Oshkosh 61 years ago. Been a lifelong resident of Oshkosh. My parents born and raised here. Their parents are born and raised here. My father and brother worked in the sheriff's department. My father's been passed away now for 25 years, but he was in the sheriff's department.
I saw that on your website.
My mother was in the school system for about 40 years. She's retired. My sister works for the housing authority. Wife's a county employee too. Been a lot of us. We've all worked community service, giving back to the community by working for the county.
Yeah.
In this
Public
case.
servants.
Yeah.
Though you're paid, you're still doing a service.
Correct.
And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
You've been at this a long time. You were a lawyer before that, of course.
With George Curtis.
George Curtis.
I watched your show with him.
Another good friend of mine, yes. Good old George Curtis. Yeah. And in fact, I remember way back then, I don't remember much about it, but I do remember you being an attorney in his office.
Yeah. 36 years ago, I became an attorney. Then prior to becoming a judge 19 years ago, I was in private practice with George for 17 years. I had the misfortune when I was 18 to lose my leg in a motorcycle accident. And
I'm just stealing all my thunder here, Judge.
Yeah.
It's a question here somewhere.
One of your questions was why I became a judge.
Yeah.
Well, after I lost my leg, because before that I did everything kind of physically. I was big into sports. I did everything physical. Once that happens to you, I got out of the hospital, I was 116 pounds. you change a lot because now I couldn't do things physically anymore. So I just started doing things mentally. But I still did I played in a semi-pro football league with one leg in Minnesota, or in Michigan for a while. So I got some press from doing that, and when I was in law school, the doctor who did my first 7 surgeries called up and said, I got this kid who was driving his bike along Division Street when the railroad tracks were there.
Yeah, those were the days, huh?
Yeah. He went under the...
Hope I didn't just kick you.
That's okay. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it.
Oh, it's this leg?
It's that leg.
It's funny because we were talking about that earlier, about kicking people under the table, and here I accidentally kick you, and there I did it again. I got to keep my feet over here, I
That's
think.
because I can't bend my foot at the ankle, and it sticks up in the air, so a lot of people kick my
All right,
foot.
this is your fault.
Yeah.
I'm
It
sorry.
is. It
Go
is.
ahead. So he was riding along the tracks along Division Street.
Yeah, and he lost both of his legs. And the doctor said, he's doing terrible. Can you come talk to him? So I went and talked to him. I spent about hour and a half with him. And when I walked into his house, all the drapes were pulled, lights were off, sitting by himself, hating life. Took me back to when I lost my leg and I was in the hospital, because I was just like that. So he and I just talked for an hour and a half. We said we would keep in touch. Told him my experiences. He did most of the listening. I did most of the talking. Really didn't hear anything from him or about him for years after that. We didn't stay in touch. And then one day I was reading the newspaper when it was more than a page.
So you're talking about the local paper, such that it is.
And there's an article about him, about how he changed his life around, how he opened his own mechanic shop, got married, has family and kids, and talking to his mother too. And they asked what changed his life. And they said spending that time with me. They even got my name wrong. But I knew.
How did they get it wrong? I'm curious.
They had Steve instead of Scott.
Oh, okay.
And so, but I knew it was me and him having this conversation. They were talking about that. So that made me, once you feel like you've done something to change someone's life, it's an awesome feeling. And being an attorney, you can do that with an individual client, but you can't touch the amount of people you can as a judge. So I started thinking about it then. And then in 1997, my dad retired then, wasn't in very good health. And during Thanksgiving weekend, we were playing cribbage. And he said, you know, someday I'd like to see you be a judge. And I used the George Curtis line, no, Dad, I'm going to work for a living. Because that's what he would always say.
Yes.
And then 2 weeks later, my dad passed away. So at that point, that's when I really started thinking about it and started working towards what do I have to do to get this position. And eventually, 5 years later, it came to fruition.
So you were appointed to a seat. So did someone pass away before they finished their term? Did they just vacate the position? Or how
Judge Hazy retired.
Oh, Judge Hazy. Okay. I guess I didn't realize that you had taken over his seat.
Yep.
Okay.
And then Judge now Bissett ran against me the next year, and I won 63 to 37%, which is a good victory.
It sure is. Yeah.
And then last 2 years, I have not had, or last 2 terms, I have not had an opponent.
Yeah. And this time you do.
I do.
So was working as an attorney in Curtis's office, was that your first job after passing the bar and graduating law school, or was
I worked for 3 years up in Green Bay.
Okay.
And then George came up for a deposition one day, and said, have you ever thought of coming back? We talked the next weekend, and 2 weeks later, I was back.
Yeah, yeah.
You know George.
Yeah, I do. And that deep voice of his.
Yeah.
Neither one of us can get that low, can we?
Oh.
So, well, that's interesting, and I'm sorry that your father passed that he passed at all, but in such an untimely fashion.
62 years old.
Wow.
One more year and I'll have beat him.
Isn't that something? It puts things in perspective,
Oh,
though,
it does.
doesn't it? You know, when
It
you start
does.
getting that age and you start surpassing what your folks were when they died. You know, it makes you feel your own mortality, though.
My mom
And
will,
puts
will
things in a
soon
lot-
be 87 next month on the 14th.
Yeah,
She's still with us and doing well.
good. That's good to know. So, you know, how did you initially become appointed then? Who put in for you to be appointed? Because that's a governor, it's a gubernatorial appointment, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
There's an announcement, and one of the attorneys from our office came back one day and said, came back from court one day and was in front of Hazy for a scheduling conference and said, Judge Hazy said it was announced today that he's retiring. So I looked on the internet and saw that it was true, and there was an application process. And I went through that process. Now, you know me for a long time. I was ready for that day, and I was ready for that day for a couple of years. So when that day came, it wasn't like I didn't have something done. I just had to push a button.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff I had done and prepared, committees I've been on, everything I've done was all pointed towards that should it come about.
Mm-hmm.
And it did, and went through the process and was appointed.
And here we are today.
You got it.
All those years later.
And
So,
January 26th, 2004.
wow. You can remember the exact day.
I can.
But that's a momentous occasion.
It is.
You know, those, like, I couldn't remember that, but it's not my life. It's
Exactly.
yours. You know, so
You can remember the name of your first dog.
I can remember it. I can remember the name of every one of my dogs. And the breed they were and what happened to them, I can remember it all. So one thing I want to talk about is you talk about, you know, well, you talked about your accident, but you talk about things that kind of motivated you, spurred you on to become a judge. One thing that I didn't know about you, and I have known you a long time, but I saw a picture of it. No, it wasn't on your website. I don't know where I saw this picture, but your arms are tattooed from the wrists up to the shoulders. And the images, and I'm not going to make you show it. I'm not going to do that. But the images are of things that have inspired you along the way
Yes.
to be a judge. So
Correct.
can you talk just a little bit about what some of the images are?
Sure.
And what they mean?
My right arm is why I became a judge arm.
Okay.
And that is, I have scales of justice with, in one scale is DC for drug court.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is dad. I have a picture of my dad's high school graduation picture where he was a Golden Gloves boxer. I have his date of birth and date he passed. My dad was in the Marines. I have Marine insignia on my elbow. Another reason, when I was in high school, I read a book, and there was a movie with Al Pacino called And Justice for All.
Great movie.
It is.
You're out of order. You're out of order. The whole bleep is out of order. It's a great movie. It really is.
So I also have that on my arm also. So that's why I did that. And then my other arm is, I'm a big Harley Davidson fan. And when I lost my leg, I stopped driving a motorcycle. I had a deal with my then wife that while we were having kids, I would not get a motorcycle and wait until the youngest one was in college, or the youngest one was in college. When she went to college, I was 50 and I got a Harley. So on one arm I have Harley Davidson insignia, and then because of, this arm kind of represents me, I like that. I like with what goes with justice, but liberty.
Mm-hmm.
So I have Lady Liberty on my
Okay.
arm. And then I go out to Sturgis for the motorcycle rally to the Badlands. And Mount Rushmore's out there. I have Mount Rushmore on my arm.
Very cool.
So
Very
they're all
cool.
things that mean something
Means
to
something
me.
to you. Sure.
And that's why I didn't get my first tattoo until I was 51, almost 52.
Wow. So only 10 or 11 years you've had
Yes.
some tats. But boy, have you made up for it.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I was a little, I wasn't taken aback, but I was a little shocked when I saw that picture because I thought, Scott, this doesn't strike me as being you, but and yet it does. You know?
Part of, you've known me long enough to know that I dance to my own beat.
Yes.
I'm not a follower, I'm a leader. So with me, I don't think that, Justice is blind. I have Lady Justice on my arm too.
It should be blind.
Yeah. And I don't judge people based upon their tattoos or what they look like, the color of their skin, their disability, their ability. I don't judge people on any of that. Part of the reasons why I really started doing it is because people don't recognize me in public with tattoos. I've had numerous death threats during my career. And my typical answer when people say, "Aren't you?" or "How do I know you? How do I know you?" and my answer usually is, "I'm a sanitation engineer." I deal with society's garbage.
That's true.
Yeah,
Do you say that to them too?
No, I
Because
don't.
you're just a
I don't.
sanitational engineer.
Yeah, I just am a sanitation
You
engineer.
deal with
But-
society's garbage.
But I,
Interesting.
yeah,
Scott. It's interesting.
Yeah, I know. But I do it so I don't have to deal with that
Yeah.
in
Well,
public and not.
I get it. I mean, I get it. Having been with a member of law enforcement for 16 some years, I get it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's actually one of my questions I want to talk about later on, but, you know, we may as well bring it up now since we're talking about it. I mean, this is not necessarily a good time for people to be judges, to be cops, to be anyone in any type of a law enforcement capacity, because it's a thankless job. It's an underpaid position. I mean, yes, people in those roles are paid well when you compare it to other jobs in society, but when you look at what you have to deal with and the threats that you have to deal with, whether they're perceived or very direct threats, they're still threats. And when you look at all those things combined, you're not paid enough, you know, and we see people leaving the law enforcement profession in our jails, in our police departments. We see them leaving left and right, and those slots are not getting filled. And if they are getting filled in some city or community, they're not getting filled very quickly. And, you know, what is going to become then? It's a hamster wheel type thing, right?
It is.
I mean, you know, we need these jobs, we need the positions filled so that we can have control over our society and so that people aren't, you know, the bad folks aren't able to commit nefarious acts on those of us who are good folks in the society. And yet, good folks in the society are saying, you're not getting me to do that job. I value my life too much. And so there's a disconnect somewhere, and I don't know how we fix it. I don't have that answer. But it's a dangerous time, a bad time and a dangerous time to be in any of those roles. And I know you were an advocate for courthouse security for a long time. So two things. Number one, what, and you kind of talked about it already, but what continues to motivate you to get up every morning and not only do this job, but want to be elected to another 6-year term to do it when it is so dangerous? And two, do you feel we have courthouse security that is just adequate right now, or do you think it's good enough?
Tough subject. Over the years, as I said, yeah, it's a good question. It is. It really is. It's something for your viewers to think about.
Yes.
Over the years, one of the first cases I had to go over to Green Lake because a judge, none of the other judges would take the case, so I went over there.
They would not take the case?
Because a judge was the victim.
Oh,
and they
okay.
weren't in our
All right.
judicial district at the time.
Okay, got
And
it.
it was a guy that didn't like the judge, had another person driving a van, pulled up beside the judge, opened the side of the van door, pointed a shotgun at the judge's head. Another car was coming the other direction. He had to slam on the brake so he didn't shoot. So I took that case. I gave that guy the maximum sentence, which I think was 10 years. He got out. Guess where his anger went?
You.
You got it.
I didn't mean to point a trigger finger at you. But
Yeah. So then he
went
came.
toward you.
My wife and I are on a motorcycle trip in Tennessee where there's not a lot of cell phone reception, and her son, who is 18 at the time, was home here in Oshkosh by himself. This guy was threatening to kill my wife and me and come to our house. I've been trying to get the legislature just to take our addresses off of things, and they won't. Their position is, you bought this when you took the job. And I said, well,
Society changes.
Yeah,
And we've
yeah.
got to change with society.
yeah. So I've had those types of things. I've had people that have sent letters. I get calls from whatever police agency it is, say, Judge, we have a credible threat. You need to lock all your doors, pull all your drapes, turn on all outside lights. We're going to have someone sit in front of your house. And they sit in front of my house for a week or whatever. In fact, I think it was last summer, I had a threat, and I was out in my driveway cleaning up one of my motorcycles, which for me is like a 2-hour process. And I had 2 of them, so I had to do it 4 hours. My neighbor from across the street, who's a big hunter, said, Scott, what's the deal with all the cop cars coming by? And I explained to him the situation, because I have to actually have these situations with my neighbors.
Yeah, yeah.
And I told him, and he actually, because he's a big hunter, got his hunting pistol, sat out on his chair, and watched me the rest of the afternoon just to protect me.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
See, those are the kinds of neighbors we should all
Yeah.
have. You know, not that we all need that kind of
Yeah.
interaction with a neighbor,
Exactly.
or that kind of concern and care from a neighbor, but we've gotten away from having true neighbors
Yeah.
and neighborly relationships.
Yeah, but
most of us don't know our neighbors anymore.
Yeah. I think
but-
that's internet,
Yeah.
social media.
Well, I think
People
we were
doing
getting away
this.
from it for a long time before that. People just, they don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
they'd rather just stay in their homes. Most of us have fenced yards, so, you know, we're within our little fence, and that's really about it.
Before I came here tonight, I was watching the national news, and they had on there that the federal government, the legislature, is putting in all of their requests a lot more money for judge security, and it has bipartisan support.
It should. Because look at the judges that have, that was going to be another question that I ask is, you know, look at thankfully there haven't been a lot, but one is too many, you know, where judges are gunned down, and whether they survive or whether they die, they should not be in that position to begin with.
Judge Rohr, who got killed here in Wisconsin a couple of years ago, he got on the bench same time I did. We were in the same class. You go to judicial college 3 years.
Yep.
We were in the same class for everything. And, you know, no one's coming into my house, zip tying me to a chair, and putting a bullet in my head. It's just not going to happen. So I have a lot of security around my house.
Well,
I do have guns, and I'm not.
we're going to talk about those guns.
I was.
We're going to talk about them.
I was not a hunter before I became a judge.
Yeah.
I was not a gun owner before I became a judge. When I got married, my wife asked me.
Because you're
To get a
remarried now.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
So my wife, 10 years ago, said, we need guns in the house. She works in the court system too. She understands what I'm going through.
Yes.
So her and I, actually, I have a concealed carry permit. And that class,
As do I.
the class to take that is kind of a joke.
It is. Yeah.
I went through the same training that law enforcement officers do when they go through their training. I went through 16 hours of training up at Northeast Wisconsin Technical College to become comfortable with carrying a gun and not injuring anything I was not intending to injure. So I went through that training, my wife and I each shot, because she went through it too, 2,500 rounds during this, went through training scenarios. It was very intense. I've done all that before I would carry. Now at that point, our courthouse had 17 open entrances and no security.
Was terrible once upon a time.
And I was in the county boardroom where there are benches with people with drawers. I tried to get those drawers locked. They gave them keys. None of them would lock it. I had a guy one day came from the jail, leg irons, belly change, handcuffs. And I look at him and he's sitting here like this, holding a knife letter opener that he just pulled out of a drawer from one of the county board members that failed to lock his drawer.
See, that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
And so that's why I was so strong, but we need something. When you start getting those threats and you start seeing those things, something needs to get done.
And I remember as a reporter, right after 9/11 happened, there was really a big push then. Got to have courthouse security, got to have courthouse security. And I can remember a number of, public, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a safety meeting for the county, the safety committee or whatever it was. And I would go to their meetings, and I would only have to go to one really, because it was the same thing, month after month after month, or meeting after meeting after meeting. And I just, I had to be objective in what I was writing for the paper, but I went home, and as I started writing this article, I just thought, this is ridiculous. What does it take for these people to get off the dime and do something?
You know what it takes? A judge in Wisconsin getting killed. 2 years ago, I went to the Tech up here has a courthouse security and safety
Class?
seminar.
Oh, okay.
And it's for people all over the United States. 2 judges from Wisconsin, me and another. That's all that showed up. Judge Rohr gets killed. This year, packed with judges.
I bet.
Packed with people from the state that work with judges. That's what it took.
Yeah.
I've been trying a long time to get something done, and until someone had to give their life in order to
And
get some
that's
security.
always the way it is, whether it's a bad intersection or a street that has too high of a speed limit or it doesn't have speed bumps in it. Whatever the case may be, it always seems like people don't want to take any action until something happens that shouldn't have happened. And then, we got to do something about this. Well, you know what? The time to do it was before such and such happened, and so got seriously hurt, maimed, or killed. That's when it should have been done. But glad you're doing it now, finally. I'm sure the family of the person who got injured or killed will thank you for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't talk about courthouse security yet,
No.
and I do want to have you talk about that. It is much better than what it was. Do you feel it's secure now?
Yes. I feel safe in that I no longer need to conceal and carry on the bench.
Okay.
I don't anymore. I don't feel like I need to because we have a single entrance,
Yep.
and they go through a magnetometer. I am convinced there are no weapons getting into the courthouse.
Yeah.
Now, to and from is a different, but I have every branch, every judge has a gun safe in their office. So if you choose to conceal and carry going in and out of the courthouse, you can do that. In fact,
Can you carry on the? Can you conceal on the bench though?
yes.
Because we were talking about that earlier. If that's a law or not.
It used to be that you couldn't.
Okay.
But
you can now.
But with the conceal and carry, actually DAs, judges can, DAs can.
Can or can't?
Can.
Okay. All right. Because I know once upon a time, I don't think the DAs could either.
No.
And
No.
and I thought that is so wrong.
Oh.
I mean, they're almost as bad as,
Yeah.
if not worse than
Yeah.
the judge, because in a worse position, I should say, than the judge, because they're the ones prosecuting these people.
Yeah.
You
And during the case itself, DA is without a question. Once the person's convicted and sentenced, it all goes to the judge.
Yeah. And these criminals, it's interesting what you said about a letter opener, but see, I don't think he should have been probably handcuffed in front of him anyway,
Yeah.
But when you start handcuffing them for a judicial appearance behind their backs, then it's, this might be inhumane, But it's interesting what these defendants, criminals can make weapons out of. I remember as a reporter,
Ever go in the prison? They have a whole board of all the shanks that they have.
I've seen it. But something as simple as they had to stop in the jail, they had to stop giving newspapers because there was one guy who took a newspaper and he would take his jail-appointed toothpaste and he would put toothpaste across part of the paper and then he'd roll it up. And then he'd put some more toothpaste down and he'd roll it up. And he'd keep doing that until he had a nice little bat. And toothpaste, when it hardens, gets very hard. And he had himself a good-sized bat. It could have been a deadly weapon. And so you have to one by one start taking these things away from these inmates that one would think, well, what harm is it giving them a newspaper to read? Come on. And it's those kinds of reasons. Let's face it, they've got nothing but time on their hands to sit and think about things.
Another thing I'm surprised about is I am not a social media person at all. So I don't do that stuff. I have people and my wife that do that stuff for me for the campaign. I have people that I put in prison that are going on my Facebook, my Judge Woldt Facebook account and commenting, saying negative things about me.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise you, does it?
But still, you're in prison and they let you use social media?
I see what you're saying there, yeah.
Yeah, that just...
Isn't that kind of silly?
Yeah, that shocked me.
Prison is supposed to be prison, jail is supposed to be jail, and I don't know. We could share a lot of stories because I've personally been aware of a lot of things in jails. So courthouse security is good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that you feel comfortable with that. So before we get into some of the other stuff, let's talk about the things that you have done. You co-founded the drug court here in the county. Talk to us about that. That was started in 2006, right?
Yeah.
With Judge Barbara Hartkey.
She didn't help me start it. She helped me when I started the drug court. This is the way it worked. When I got on the bench, I made it a point to go to every single county agency that dealt with the court system. Human Services, jail, I went to probation, went to all these different places. And when I spoke with the sheriff and Mike Brooks at the time. Mm-hmm. And Mike said, Scott, what are we going to do about these drugs? I said, well, I heard about this thing called drug court. Maybe we could do something, talk about that. So then he and I started talking. We went to Minnesota to see what they do there. We went to La Crosse. They were one of 3 drug courts in the state at the time. And we came back and said, there were probably 10, 15 of us I'm the only one left. And they said, what are we going to do? And no one raised their hand except for me. So I became the chair of the Winnebago County Safe Streets Committee. What we do is we try to make cost-effective alternatives to incarceration. So I started researching drug court, and long and short of it, ended up getting drug court. Judge Key and I started drug court together. We were the judges for 10 years. Evidence-based program, it cost about $8,800 to go through drug court. Prison right now is $38,000 a year. Recidivism rate for those who successfully complete drug court is 50% decrease in recidivism. One of the reasons why I do it is I got a text yesterday from one of my former graduates, Kristen. Actually,
Was she on the show? You brought somebody on the show.
It was a different one. It's a different one.
Okay, all right.
She, 10 years clean yesterday.
Wow.
I married her 5 years ago. She has a husband, 2 kids, has the same job for 10 years. Now she's in management.
Wow.
Yeah,
those are the things that make what you do rewarding, right?
That's exactly right. That's why you do it. That's why I want to continue to do it.
Yeah.
Now, after that, okay, we got drugs. What are we going to do now with drunk driving, these drunk drivers? Well, in order for us to do something, I got to get the law changed. So at that time, Carol Ressler,
Yep.
her and I went about getting the law changed so we could do a pilot program, which is now Safe Streets Treatment Option Program, which became law in the state of Wisconsin. And right now we treat OWI, second and third OWI offenders. We make them get treatment as opposed to go to jail. It's kind of an alternative. So far through that program, our recidivism went from 37% to 17%, so more than a 50% drop in recidivism. In both of those programs, drug court and the STOP program, so far since we started those programs, 85,000 hours of community service work.
Wow.
That's people giving back.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cost to be in these programs too. So these are beneficial ways they're alternatives corporate. They're just like our program, they fall right under our program. Cost-effective ways to do alternatives to incarceration. The 42,000 hours of community service work the STOP people did, that would have been 42,000 days of incarceration.
Wow.
The sheriff loves these programs.
That's a lot when you think about it.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming when you think about it.
Yeah, like 40 or 85,000. Your average person, full-time worker, with taking a couple of weeks of vacation, works 2,000 hours a year.
Yeah.
And this is
32,000. Yeah. I mean, and yet for some people, I think incarceration is necessary.
I agree.
We really have had for many years just a horrible, I think. People have looked at us in a horrible way. We've had a horrible reputation for being too easy on people who drive drunk. And when I say drunk, I'm also talking about being impaired with drugs.
Yes.
They go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned.
They do.
And, when people can have 6, 7, 10 OWIs or DWIs, depends on where you are in the country. Some say driving while impaired or under the influence. Others are operating while. And I've lived in both parts where they're both things. But so I always have to kind of stop and think about where I am. But, you shouldn't get to have that many chances behind the wheel before you are put away. And, do we even use effectively, I know we use it, but do we even use effectively in this state the bars that go on people's wheels and the little thing that they have to blow into before they can start up their car? Do we use
Ignition
that
interlock?
Effectively?
I think the ignition interlock we do, but take take into consideration, part of the reason why we started the STOP program is to make people get their driver's license. Because Winnebago County averaged 55 operating after revocations a week back then. Because you get an OWI, you think a driver's license stops you from driving?
Well, we find too often that it does not. So
Yeah. So
there's
what
the
we
answer to
thought,
that
what would be
question.
smarter? Let's get these people treatment, because that's the thing that was keeping them from getting their driver's license, going through the assessment and getting the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
That was the number one thing they didn't do. We make them, through that program, get the assessment and get the treatment. That's why recidivism goes down as much as it does. So now that they go through that, you know what our average for OARs is now that we do this program?
No, what?
It was 55, now it's 5.
Really? Wow. Okay. Well, that's wonderful, because even with the interlock, the ignition interlock, and the other thing, you can just drive somebody else's car. I mean, it doesn't stop you from driving. It stops you from driving your vehicle, not driving in general.
Right now, the number one reason they get the 5 we get, they pull the person over because registered owner, still have their car, registered owner of the vehicle they just bought is revoked. That's the reason they stop them. Guess what? OAR for no IID, no ignition interlock device.
It's crazy. All right, let's get to some unpleasant stuff.
I say put them all on Washington Island. We'll just put them all there.
I'm missing it. What do you mean?
All these people with OWIs, put them all on Washington Island.
What about the people who live out
I'm
by
just-
Washington Island? Come on. I know you're just kidding, but put them somewhere, right? Put them somewhere where they can't hurt anyone else. They can just hurt each other. So in the last year or so, you've had one thing in particular that has impacted you, and I want to talk about it because it wouldn't be right if we didn't. You were suspended by the Wisconsin Supreme Court for 1 week without pay due to a series of incidents in which you brandished your weapon in the courtroom, your handgun, and you directed what the Supreme Court said. They said you used, quote, undignified, discourteous, and disrespectful language unbecoming of a judge, unquote, and that you showed, quote, an open disregard of your obligation to observe the public in a fair, reasoned, impartial, and courteous way, unquote. And then they said that they concluded that a short suspension was necessary to ensure that, judges would treat people in their courtroom fairly and respectfully and that kind of thing. There were some comments that you had made to someone who was she was a younger person who was sexually assaulted, and you had allegedly made some comments to her too. So let's talk about this stuff. Let's talk about the gun first, brandishing a weapon in the courtroom. One in which wasn't it with a defendant, where you said, you're lucky you didn't break into my home because you'd be dead?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start there.
Okay.
What would have prompted you to have done that?
All right. Had a guy that was second time charged, and the reason I could talk about this case now, they appealed all the decisions. I was affirmed on all of the decisions. That case is done. He's off supervision. Was a 26-year-old who lived with his parents, had previously been in prison for sexually assaulting one of the children at his mother's daycare. He broke into his neighbor's house, stole their garage door opener, and took the locking mechanism out of the doors of their house. Took the wife's underwear, took them home, did what he needed to do in those underwear, and he did that back and forth for about 2 weeks until he got caught.
What a wonderful stand-up guy.
At the sentencing, both the defense attorney and the state, the state was asking for a minimal amount of jail. The defense is asking for no jail whatsoever, just probation. The victim father the guy that owned the house next door to these people said, I gave him his right to address the court. He said, Judge, this is our dream house. My wife and I live here. We have 2 young daughters. And he starts giving me this gut-wrenching story about now I've got to live 50 feet away from these people.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was saying, what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do? And I said, you have 2 options. One is, from my perspective, my family's not worth it. I would move. While I was doing that, I cleared my firearm to make it safe. I locked it open, and I said, or your other alternative is to buy one of these. I put it back down. That was it. Then I said to that kid, when I was sentencing the kid, I said, you know, today's society, we have what is called the castle doctrine.
Yep.
The castle doctrine is you come into someone's home, they can shoot you. If you would have done this in my house, I would have shot you.
Yeah.
What's not right about that? The Supreme Court didn't agree with that. And that's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I get it. And I certainly can understand how someone in your position, seeing what you see day in and day out, would get really frustrated. You know. And there's another one that, go ahead. Go ahead, finish.
I agree that at that time in my life, I was not the nicest person in the world. I was going through a lot of personal issues.
How long ago was it, Scott?
These are 8 years ago.
8 years ago.
All of these cases are 8 years ago.
All right.
And
I think that's important to note because this all just kind of came to fruition in the last year or two.
Yeah.
And you served this 7 days last August.
It's been going on a long time.
Yeah, so this was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were going through a lot back then.
So, yeah, all 3 of these cases, 3 of these instances took place in a 1-week period of time. At that point, I found out some stuff in my personal life that was very difficult for me to handle. And I was not only not nice to people in court, I was not nice to anyone anywhere. And I had some real issues that I had to deal with.
So how did you cope with them? What did you do?
One of my drug court graduates suggested to me that, although Judge came up and said, Judge, I know you don't have any addiction issues, but in order for you to get over this stuff, I think you should get a sponsor and go through the steps. So I talked to my wife, and I was going to have that kid do it because he was very strong in his recovery. Then I found out his mother had a case in front of me.
Oh.
Exactly. So the guy who does my tattoos, he's now soon to be, next month, the 12th, will have 14 years clean. He said he would do it with me. And there are 2 types of AA meetings. There are open meetings and closed ones. Open meetings, anyone, even if you're not an alcoholic, can go. So I started going to meetings, and he started putting me through the steps, 12 steps. And I started working the 12 steps and went through the amends process. I made amends with my ex-wife, started making a lot of changes in my life. I still, to this day, go to at least 1 AA meeting a week. It helps me, well, I don't know if you know the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That is huge.
Yeah.
And that I've changed my life because of that. And the people that know me know that I've made a lot of those changes. I've been doing those meetings now for going on 6 years.
So here's my question, and gosh, we're running out of time. I can't even believe this. So here's my question then. You were going through a really bad a large bad patch in your life and not being such a nice person, making some not so good decisions. Do you take that into account when you're sentencing someone who's before you, Judge? Okay, maybe this person's going through a bad patch in their life, and maybe I should, think about this and take that into account before I render my sentence.
Absolutely. With
okay.
everybody.
Okay.
I always have. There's a lot that I think we were talking about another case before we started today, and the intent that goes into something, and because people make, there's a certain case where I can't talk about it with some homicides with driving, and with good people, good families, and good people make bad choices at times.
Yeah,
we all do.
sometimes we do.
I think there are good people. There are good people that made bad choices at time, and there are evil people. I don't think other people. Some people are going to hear that I've done this and try to portray me as an evil person. If you know me, I'm a good person that made some bad choices.
That's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I have known you for a long time, and frankly, I was surprised when I heard these things, because that's not the Judge Scott Woldt that I know, and I don't think I knew you, but I knew of you when you were still in, George Curtis's office. Yeah. So I've known of you for a very long time. And I've known you for a very long time. And it just didn't strike me as being who I knew you to be. But I said, I still got to ask these questions.
Oh, yeah.
Still got to ask them.
I agree.
And so the other one was, you had made some comment to, you had referred to someone as a so-called victim or something like that. It was with that sexual assault victim. I can't find it right now.
The victim wasn't there. It was a case where an attorney was making. It was a kid that was 19 years old, and came into court and said the 15-year-old girl who performed oral sex on him, he did it because he didn't know anyone at the party. And he felt awkward, so he felt that he had to have her do that. My response, the attorney is making this argument. My response to this is being very sarcastic. It just was unbelievably, in my opinion, terrible. It was a terrible argument. No one. And that's why I said, I don't know who here, raise your hand if you go to parties and you feel awkward, so you need to have someone perform oral sex on you. I didn't use those words, but that was I was being sarcastic.
Yeah.
I don't have a good record with victim rights. I mean, I was doing the drunk driving victim impact panel. I was a chair of that. When I got on the bench, I was working with the Christine Ann Center. I will give everyone their opportunity to speak in my courtroom. That was in that week period of time, and when someone said something that was dumb, which it was, I reacted, and I reacted poorly. Without a doubt.
Then I think the point that we need to make here, and thank you for being as honest and forthright as you have. I think the point that needs to be made is that you've got 6-year terms. This was 8 years ago, you said, and so that was one full term ago, almost.
Correct.
And it was at a different time in your life, and not that that's an excuse, but it's a reason. And sometimes that's all we can do is give reasons why something was done, and and that's it.
I would not recommend getting divorced to anyone. It was a very stressful time in my life.
It can be.
And the time after that, with dealing with children, was very difficult for me.
Yes.
But it actually made me a better judge. in that I understand the people that come in front of me with divorces now. I understand what they go through.
Sure, yeah.
I don't recommend
So
it
you
to
can go to
anybody.
family court and be a judge there, right?
Well, we do all that stuff. We do everything.
I just want to, and our time is really winding down here, but one thing, I know a lot of attorneys, and one thing that I've heard from some attorneys is he's awful when it comes to other attorneys. We try and be timely and get to his court on time, but, sometimes we're hung up in another court and we can't get there on time. And, they were lamenting that you have threatened to even hold them in contempt if they're not in your courtroom on time. Do you want to just very briefly speak to that?
10 years ago, that's true.
So this is something else that came from long ago?
Yes.
Okay.
Now,
all right.
if I ever threatened to hold someone in contempt for being late to my court, this wasn't a one-time thing.
Okay.
There are certain attorneys that will be late to their own funeral.
Okay.
So, but
All
that's
right.
something that's a long time ago.
Okay. Very good. Well, then I thank you for clearing that up too, because when you read about this stuff in the newspaper, it doesn't always say, hey, this happened back at such and such a time. And that's why also I'm glad that I gave you an opportunity to talk about it. So very quickly then, tell us why people should vote for you as opposed to your opponent. Kayisha, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Kayisha Hazy.
I've been a judge now for 19 years, and when it comes to judge, experience matters. I've handled over 30,000 cases through disposition. And that's why, if you look at these 5 cases that I had issues with, the 5 cases out of the 30,000 I've handled, I don't think it's a true...
It's not representative
Yeah.
of who you are.
It's, exactly.
Okay.
Backlog in this state, 35,000 cases. My courtroom, 0. Did 190 jury trials. In fact, I'm the most tenured judge, not only in this county, but in our judicial district. 26 judges, 20 of those 26 are in their first term.
Okay.
So experience matters, and that institutional knowledge is very helpful.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for being here. I wish we had had more time.
I do too. It's always nice to talk to you.
It is. Thank you so much, and good luck in the upcoming election.
Thank you.
Now, I promised that I would talk about this, so in our remaining time here, if you need to register to vote, first of all, the general election again is Tuesday, April 4th. If you need to register to vote, there are a couple of different ways you can do that. Number one, you can register by mail. Your request, your proof of residence must be postmarked to your municipal clerk no later than March 15th, which, as we're taping this on March 9th, is 6 days away. So you don't have a lot of time to do that. You can also register to vote online by going to myvote.wi.gov. Again, that's myvote.wi.gov. But again, you have to have done that before the March 15th. And then you can just go to your clerk's office. You can also register at the polls on election day, but you better talk to your municipal clerk beforehand to make sure that you're taking the right documentation so that you can vote. And very lastly, very quickly, we need volunteers on this show. It's up on your screen right now. If you are interested in helping us out, we just have 4 to 5 hours a month that we do this. It's a lot of fun. You don't need any experience. Get in touch with me and we will put you through the paces, and we'd be happy to have you. That's going to do it for the show. So thank you again to Judge Scott Woldt for being here. Whoever you vote for in whatever capacity on election day, the important thing is to cast your ballot, so get registered to vote. And we will see you next time. Thanks again to the judge, to my crew, and to you. We'll see you again soon. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh. Up.